let's put it into a deeper perspective. This is since 2000, so it's 24 years, through 6 games, it covers 798 teams. Browns red zone trip tied for 784th, so only 15 or worse. Offensive penalties tied for 795, only 3 or worse. Yards to go on third down, 795, tied for third worst. Third down conversions, only one team has been worse through 6 games since 2000. So when we say this is historically bad, it's not hyperbole. Those are some definitive numbers that, it's like, well, that's why they haven't scored 20 points yet in a game.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's again, we're watching it and you're saying to yourself, this is awful. Like you are consuming through 6 games some of the worst offensive football that anybody has watched. You could make a logical argument that was the roughest 6 games of football that any NFL fan has had to consume. And I think that what makes people the most angry at this point, 6 weeks into a season that they tried to sell themselves as legitimate Super Bowl contenders, is that fact, right? This isn't average. If this offense was average, they'd have three, could talk me into 4 wins right now. I don't think teams have been, think about the Giants, think about the Raiders, think about the Eagles game you just watched. And then you obviously include the only game that they've won. If this offense was average, you're talking about multiple wins at this point. So, yeah, it's so hard to stomach that this is the reality they're living in. And I think the hardest part of that discussion is that they control their fate in the decision making around who they're playing. And they're telling you that the quarterback who is actively struggling, and I think could really use a pause to step back and like evaluate what's going on the field from the sideline, they won't even consider it. And when you get the recipe of, and again, like you look at all the ingredients that's making this failed meal, an offensive line that's in turmoil with injuries at tackle, with injuries at guard, with injuries at center. And then you talk about wide receivers failing to do their part in consistently catching the football, a quarterback who's doing, you know, I don't think the numbers can tell you any other reality than playing some of the poorest football we have seen. He's not independent here. He is definitely a collective issue, but he is not meeting his end of the bargain by any stretch of the imagination, and is hurting them more often than helping them. And then you have, I think you again, I don't think I'm being too harsh here, but I think some pretty average running backs. So you have nobody who's overcoming anything. I mean, in theory, you're talking about a trade of Amari Cooper to the Bills, and you're like, that's the Browns' best offensive weapon. But if you look at ESPN's analytics on wide receiver, he's dead last this year in terms of contribution because of how bad the drops have been. Like, I mean, it's pretty jarring what you just showed about how bad they have been. Like, it kind of is kind of crazy to think that we are consuming some of the worst football since the turn of the turn of the century. Um, but that's it.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
you know,
It's crazy.
our eyes do not lie.